I'm Mark Cleghorn. Welcome to a film on using a reflector on location during autumn. In fact, pretty much you could actually think of it using a reflector on location anytime. The reason that I'm doing it is that I have a saying that is natural light before reflector, reflector before a flash, and flash is a kind of a last resort. That's the basic training that I give to all photographers that have kind of either worked for me or I've been on workshops with and things. And the reason being on that is about speed. When we've got time to set things up, we can pretty much control everything in our environment. And the likes of off-camera flash will pretty much create dramatic results no matter what. If you're a portrait photographer, lifestyle portrait photographer or wedding photographer, you pretty much need to work much quicker, and you may not have kind of a spare set of hands to actually hold a flash, move a flash or whatever it would be, and it kind of becomes a little bit more complicated. So I always kind of revert to a reflector if I've got a spare pair of hands, because they don't need to be changed. There's little kind of difference going to happen if they move the flash a little bit closer or a little bit further away from the subject as such. So the reflector is my best friend. And the reason that we have the natural light as the kind of the first go-to setup is that learning to use the natural light in the environment is, I believe, one of the most powerful things that you can do as a photographer, especially as a people photographer, no matter what you specialize in. Understand the natural light, understand how to use the natural light, how to understand how to manipulate that natural light, and you'll get great results. So in autumn, one of the benefits we've got is that the structure of the trees, with all the leaves beginning to fall, it allows us to actually kind of go deeper into the wood and use the likes of light coming from behind or from above that we couldn't kind of capture during the course of the summer months because the wood is too dark and dead and there's too little dappled light getting through to really make an easy difference. Yes, you know, with experience you can get really deep dark into the woods, find some dappled light and actually create some amazing images. But as a rule, when you're getting going, I would obviously kind of start to practice in the autumn time or the fall to allow yourselves to kind of see the light quicker and basically to move it and manipulate it and things really. So what we're really looking to do is, if we're kind of looking at the natural light, the first thing that I would do is, if I can't get the subject to look at me with great light, I don't want them to look at me, I want them to look away. So I want them to actually be able to actually have the 5 planes of the face lit by the sunlight. So remember, the 5 planes of the face are the forehead, the chin, the 2 cheeks and the nose. And then by looking towards the light source more, so in other words, here we know the light is pretty much coming from like a 10 to 12 o'clock position if we kind of put her in the middle of a clock. So that's where we can see this lighting coming onto the face and so on with it. However, when you're shooting a full length image or even the subject small in a landscape, this image can look very dark. And more often than not, I see photographers open up the exposure because they haven't done the kind of the trust in themselves when they meter from the face. And I would always use a little meter from the face towards the light source. And by doing that, I can get an accurate reading of the light. And then kind of I'm going to get perfect exposures each time rather than relying on an automation. Because relying on an automation, more often than not, it's going to make the image much brighter for you because it thinks that's what you want to do. So if you kind of shoot this image first, because you know the exposure on the camera is now set by the likes of a handheld meter, but you look on the back of the camera, you think, well, this is a bit dark. The first thing I would do is go in and photograph close up of the face first, all right? Then you will see your exposure is accurate. It's just actually as it sees itself all over makes you open up the exposure. That's not what we're on about. So when we get in close to the subject, kind of here, Heather's leaning onto a lamppost, and if we kind of go into the eyes, they're pretty much dead. There will be some catch light of some kind bouncing off a path bouncing off kind of my jacket or somebody else around or whatever it is, you will get a little bit of light. But if I open up the exposure onto the face to kind of get more detail in the eyes, all I'm really doing is open up the overall exposure. So this is where we want to pop in a little bit of reflector. And in autumn time, I tend to use a white and a silver mix reflector. They're like kind of stripes on them. And it allows to kind of punch a little bit more light in. If you really want a kind of a warmer light, which we used to with film photography, where we couldn't kind of control color balance in the post, as it were, then you would obviously use the likes of a sunlight reflector, which is a silver and a gold, or a gold and a white stripe reflector, and that will bounce a warmer light into the face. But you can see already here in Heather's face, we've got that lovely kind of catch light in the eyes now, and it kind of brightens everything up. It's not only putting the catch light in the eye, but it's lifting the shadow detail across the face. So any tiredness below the eye, the kind of the lines, the bags, as it were, that is being lifted. There's more detail in the shadow. Now you could say, well, hang on, Mark, you cheated here. You've opened up the exposure. Well, yes, I have, because I've increased more light into the subject, which allows me to open up the exposure just that little bit more. And what you wouldn't get is these lovely catch lights within the eye if you just kind of opened up your exposure. The catch lights are really the secret to this image. But if you notice, the catch light in Heather's eye is more down to the kind of the 4 o'clock position, 5 o'clock position, if we were looking close on the eye. Now that means that the reflector is down to my right hand side and it's bouncing the light up. And, you know, that's not always the best place to actually be doing it. But when you kind of have a subject looking down, you're working alone, you can only hold a reflector in your hand. So my camera's in my right hand. Basically, I put my reflector in my left hand, and then it'll cross my body, bounce back up again, and then I can take the shot. Or you've got a help of a mum or an assistant or a friend or whatever it is to actually kind of bounce that light back up. But you can physically see the quality of the light change, of course. You know, if we look at this shot of Heather, I've purposely shot from low down up, and I've kind of put a little bit of breath on the lens to get this fogginess and everything else. But I can still maintain the quality of this kind of dreamy element, this backlight, and I can add the kind of the reflector in again. This time it's completely below the camera. Or if I kind of held it on Heather, she could hold it in her hands, let's say, and that would bounce in enough light. But remember, we always need an angle to the reflector to bounce the light to the kind of the place where we want it to go to. So, you know, nothing wrong with the image on the left-hand side, because this is being used for creativity, of course. But the image on the right-hand side, if I now breathed on my lens to get the foggy effect, I would actually have more of a contrast and less of the kind of the problems that I've got with the image on the left-hand side with it. So when we start to kind of boil back down to the beginning, when we're working at a distance, you might think it's harder to kind of work with a reflector, but that's when you might want to swap from a striped reflector or a white reflector to something which is more kind of pronounced, like a silver reflector and so on with it. So from a distance without the reflector here, this is kind of a good exposure. But when I kind of add the reflector onto the image next, you can see what it's done. It looks like it's almost flash photography. And all we've done, in fact, is put the reflector above the kind of the camera position. So now this is more like you were going to kind of shoot with like a beauty dish above camera as such. But you can see where the reflector is. It's high. The angle of the reflector is kind of bouncing through to kind of pop the light in. And when we're working at a distance here, you can see with this striped reflector that has like a diffusion panel as well, that it's enough light to actually pop through, so you completely enhance this portrait light onto the face, which is obviously what I'm trying to do here. Where you're using a flash, unless you control the flash with the likes of a honeycomb or a snoot or something like that, if you just used it on camera, it would light up the whole scene, including the leaves on the floor, where really what we're trying to do is just illuminate the subject's face. So image on the left is exposed from the face towards the camera position now, because she's looking at me, okay? And in exactly the same way, I'll take another exposure when the reflector's on. in the same way, so towards the camera position. If Heather was looking off to the side, looking towards the natural light, then the metering would be done towards the natural light source. If I was using a flash, the metering would be taken towards the flash. Okay, so in this case, the reflector is what I'm trying to expose for now. And you can see how dark the background has gone. I've increased my kind of working exposure here by a good stop by just adding that reflector on, because she's in that kind of dull light. And as I was saying to you, we're quite deep into the forest here, and we're able to kind of use the backlight, because backlight when I'm using reflector is my favorite light. And then I can just pop it back into the subject. So I get that beautiful, beautiful pop, almost a spotlight styling of lighting onto it. And all we're doing is adding that reflector on just above the camera position, slightly off to the one side, because then you've got a direction to the light a little bit more than right above the camera position. And what you end up with is a simple, easy solution, and a great way to get a more dramatic portrait image or wedding image in the autumn months. Try kind of working in that deep dark wood, as it were.